Welcome back to another episode of the For-IN-Sight podcast, episode 31. I'm your host, Mike Obi. Joining me on another collab edition is a guy who's into the mental health realm, which I think will be good for everybody to learn from because, you never can have too much knowledge in that field. But we have a great episode for you guys this week. Without further ado, Doug Sands, how are you?
Hello. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm doing very well.
All right, very good. Thank you for coming on to the show. So where I like to always start off with every guest is just to get a little bit of background. You're into this mental health space. So talk about what it is that you do specifically and how you got into it.
Yeah, I focus on helping people with anxiety, and I do that using hypnosis. That's my number one tool. It's very important to me because anxiety and depression were things I struggled with my entire life. My mother had depression. And so it ran in my family, and I developed depression when I was in, I think, 16 or 17 in my last year of high school. And as I was moving out into the world, into college and all those other things, searching for my purpose, I ended up leaving college and bouncing around the US doing some seasonal work. And it wasn't until I had this near-death experience kind of that led me to meditation. And that was the first time I really took ownership of my own mental health. Before then, it had been therapy and medication. And those are great. But at the time, it was like I was expecting them to fix me. And meditation showed me that I have so much more capability in changing my own emotions and my own thoughts. And that led me to hypnosis. And ever since, I've just been practicing both of them. And I've been helping people with those same tools.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I think when it comes to this whole mental health space, it's really hard for people really to kind of grasp because mental health isn't something like you can really see and measure and calculate. You know what I'm saying? It's all in with people's heads. And so I think for a large part of, just history and time, there's been a stigma to it. It's like, well, you're weak, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. That type of label. And so I think most of the time people, when they have anxiety, when they have stuff that is going on, what really compounds the problem is they never deal with it. They never acknowledge that they have something going on and they don't ever seek the help. And because they don't ever seek the help, it just festers and it just grows. And, it's just like, open wound that you never try to heal. It's just, you never really deal with the problem. So I think, definitely meditation is important, especially, we're dealing with COVID and people are being quarantined for the first time ever. And I think mental health and just sanity and things of that nature are all things that people have really had to try to take seriously. So now get into hypnosis, because I'm familiar with meditation, but for those people who really don't understand what hypnosis is, there could tend to be a label of hypnosis as a matter of what you see on TV. You hold the clock in front of someone's eyes and you kind of lull them to sleep. So go into what it really is.
Hypnosis, it's essentially meditation with a goal. And that's not me saying that. That's a quote from, I think, Grace Smith. She's a very famous hypnotist. But it's very similar when you look at the brainwave patterns behind it. So when you're going into solo meditation, your brain is actually speeding up. It's going into that gamma frequency. But when you're doing a guided meditation, you're actually your brainwaves are slowing down and you're going closer to sleep. You're going closer to that hypnotic state. And so people who do meditation, they often say the first time they've experienced hypnosis that it felt like a very deep meditation session.
No, I think, the two terms are really, kind of related. I mean, bottom line is you're within your own head and you're trying to really piece together your thoughts and your beliefs, and you're trying to cleanse the negative energy. That's the way I've always, perceived it is you're really trying to kind of pinpoint what's going on in there and trying to figure it out and trying to fix the problem.
Absolutely.
So getting into maybe your personal experience, you already talked about, and you alluded to, you had a near-death experience. Now, just without getting too personal, what made you just fully embark on the journey, would you say?
I think I was ready for it. I had reached that threshold of hitting rock bottom. I had been struggling for years with that mental health, and after that experience, I had such anxiety that just bubbled up. Like there was nothing I could do about it. That's what it felt like at the time. And it was kind of this last ditch effort to kind of reach out to these other things. And I grew up in a fairly Christian household, and Buddhism and meditation, they weren't even on the table. And
Right.
so this was like me reaching out into the left field completely. And I think when I finally accepted it and I finally opened myself up to it, I just fell in love with it. But it wasn't until I was ready. I wasn't ready in that place to be open to it. And I needed to get to that. I kind of had to have the hard knocks way of seeing it, I guess.
Yeah. Now, talk about what was finally that breaking point for you, because I think that's the part when it comes to dealing with mental health that most people are trying to figure out. I mean, and unfortunately, it does take kind of people hitting that rock bottom, that point of no return, for them to kind of say, okay, well, I need to try something, but I think we can try to prevent that from happening, right? So go into what was that point in time that made you say, no, I need to do something different?
I think there's the one really big one, but I think there were multiple points on that journey that really shaped it. Because immediately after high school, I left for a summer job and I went cold turkey off therapy. I ended up having to come back and do a couple more weeks of therapy just to kind of smooth that transition out. And when I was still in college, I was still taking medication, and I knew I wanted something more, but I wasn't sure what it was. And so I dropped out of college, and I definitely don't recommend that. That was just my journey. Yes. I moved out to Maine, halfway across the country, to work the summer job. And while I was there, I started to see that my mental illness was not something that stuck with me, at least to that extent. It was partially based on my environment, I should say. And I was young and foolish, and I wanted to be whole. And that's a very loaded term, but we still have that stigma of mental health as being broken or being something's wrong with you. And I bought into that. And so I ended up dropping out of my medication program. I just stopped taking it. And for a while I was fine. I mean, it was the summertime and I had other things to occupy myself. But that winter I moved to New Hampshire, to the White Mountains, and it's very, very cold and very dark for much of the day. And so those mental health issues really came back with a vengeance. And I think leading up to that, even had I not had the crazy hike, I think a couple months down the road, I would have had some sort of mental breakdown that would have gotten me to that point. Again, I definitely don't recommend anyone goes off their medication until they're completely confident and they've had their doctor's approval. I mean, it's a very rash decision that I'm very thankful that I was able to make it through.
No, I think, the point you talked about of, your surroundings do play a large factor, if not the biggest factor in, just how a person perceives life and, their circumstances. If you're around negative influences, negative people, you tend to think negatively about yourself and where you foresee your life going, right? So I think, the fact that you were able to get out of that environment and you took it upon yourself to kind of be the change that you wanted, is admirable. And I think that's critical for many people in this whole mental health journey, because first off, it is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not going to be fixed overnight, and it's not one specific thing in one day that'll fix the issues. You know what I'm saying? They didn't build overnight, therefore they won't be fixed overnight. I think that's the one thing that you're kind of talking about, and that I think most people kind of feel is that, mental health seems to be something that you could just take medication for, just take a pill and you think, your issues are gone. It doesn't really work like that in reality. And it's not just with mental health, but really in anything that takes, real sustainable change. It takes, constant effort and constant practice to really get it to where it needs to be.
Absolutely. And I think when I was discovering my meditation practice, that's what I had to keep coming back to. It was a constant process. It was really the first time I sat down with my own thoughts, because my family, they use busyness to mask their emotions. Like if you were constantly busy, you didn't have to think about things. And so just the radical act of sitting down for 5 minutes with nothing to do but think, or try not to think, essentially, that blew my mind. And I really had a tough time in the first couple of weeks and even months really progressing into that. And it's still something that I practice to this day. It's still something I'm continually returning to and building that muscle and exercising it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. That first off, people who mask their mental issues with being busy and trying to sort of run away from it. To me, I've tried that as well, trying to say, okay, well, if I'm stressed out, let me just create a whole bunch of different, avenues for me to outlet my stress. The thing though is that you're running away from it. You're not fixing the problem. So it's still gonna be there. You have to really take on the issue head on and figure it out, which means sitting down and saying, okay, why do I feel the way that I feel? Okay, is it something that happened in my past? Is it a traumatic experience? Is it a relationship? Is it, being bullied? Whatever the case may be, and really be honest with yourself and be authentic with yourself. Once you get to that point, then the first step to healing can start, because now you've acknowledged the problem, right? And I think, in our world that we live in today, in 2020, where everything is done at 100 miles per hour, people really don't ever have the time to, invest in themselves and to say, well, man, I have this issue that I really should fix. Everything is about, well, I'm too busy to fix it. I'm too busy to take time out for my mental health. And I think that's unfortunate. And there are certain people, who they don't ever get the problems fixed, and then they end up having, serious long-term damage, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
So transitioning now, we've gotten into hypnosis, we've gotten into meditation. So just talk about these alternative ways that people can deal with their mental illness.
Yeah. So hypnosis is my main tool, but I really encourage anyone who's starting on this journey or anywhere on this journey to find what works for them. Because at first, for me, it was meditation, and then I transitioned. On my journey, at times it's been yoga, it's been meditation or hypnosis or neurolinguistic programming. All these tools, they all help and they all work. And so I encourage people to find something that works for them. For me personally, I love to do hypnosis because that's what got me the biggest results. And when people come to me, the first thing I do is I have to break down those misconceptions of what it actually is. We talked a bit about the brainwaves behind hypnosis, but it's been studied for over 150 years. And here in America, we're still kind of lagging behind, but in Europe, it's a very accepted practice. I think in 1892, that was the first time it was accepted by a major scientific board, and I believe that was the British Medical Association. It was followed by the American Medical Association, the National Institute of Health. It's even approved by the National Cancer Institute as a method for healing and for promoting health and making those changes. And so when I'm working with someone with hypnosis, especially for mental health, after we break down those misconceptions, next we build in exactly what it is they want to work on. Because my idea of anxiety or depression is not the same as theirs. And if I'm just giving general suggestions, it might work, but when we sit down and craft those suggestions together, that gives us the best guarantee of success. Because a person's unconscious mind, if it doesn't agree with the suggestion you give them, it's either going to ignore it or it's going to bring them out of the hypnosis. And so once we got those established, we use language patterns and other things to get them into that deep meditative state, that theta frequency. And then we use tools from psychology and neuroscience, the groundwork of change work. And then simply we close it up at the end. And at the very end, in the last 5 to 10 minutes, I'm typically doing a secondary session or hypnosis session to double check that the changes that we've worked on in that session are not anchored to that therapy room or client session, that they're actually going to last out into the future.
So then go into more detail about a hypnosis session that you may go through with a client. What does it entail? How does it go? And what is the process?
Absolutely. So when a person first comes in, hypnosis is all about trust, as is therapy and other change modalities. And so the very first thing I have to do is really build that trust with a person. And when we have that, the rest kind of falls into place. I mean, I've been doing this long enough that the systems seem to work on their own. But when we've cleared up exactly what it is they want to work on and we built those suggestions, then I help them get to that state. And that's usually about 10 minutes, I'd say. Like, there are some very rapid inductions that happen in seconds. There are some that take hours, but I find a very nice sweet spot between, I don't know, 5 and 10 minutes where people really get to that comfortable state. And then we're working with either changing memories or building in new resources for the future. Mm-hmm. And when we change the memory, it's amazing because we can actually study the brain changing itself. I believe it's the protein kinase C that is actually restructuring itself every single time that we access a memory. And when you're doing that in hypnosis, you're simply doing that intentionally. And the cool thing about that is when you change such a foundational memory, like say someone got bitten by a dog when they were 4 years old, mm-hmm. when you change that foundational memory, every single coping mechanism and other issue that was built on that foundation starts to crumble because it doesn't have that to support it anymore. Mm-hmm. And the other way we really make change in hypnosis is by building in new resources for the future, by rehearsing new things through visualization or positive suggestions, or even by building in new identity states that they can access in those times.
Yeah, no, I think it's important because people's negative experiences, I think, really can hamper them and really kind of weigh them down. You know, the good that happens, okay, it's done. But we live in a very what have you done for me lately culture where, you know, okay, you do one thing, great. Okay, so what? What's the next thing? But the thing that you do wrong, people will lag on to it, not only, you know, your peers, but ourselves. And so I think it's really important to let people know and for people to understand that, you know, negative experiences, just like positive experiences, they should be left in the past. You learn from them and you keep on moving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes people come to me and ask, can you remove this memory? And I'm not exactly sure you can, because the unconscious mind wants to protect you. Mm-hmm. And if it is a negative memory, there is some lesson that your mind learned from that. Whether it was the right lesson, you know, if in the case of the dog, perhaps you fear all dogs, or perhaps it's the lesson that some dogs are dangerous and sometimes bad things happen to good people. You don't want to completely erase it because that lesson was hard fought and it's an integral part of their personality.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So now talk about the link between meditation and hypnosis, especially from a neurological perspective.
Yeah, we looked at the brainwaves a little bit, but when a person is in hypnosis, their brainwaves are slowing down. They're going closer to sleep. They're not technically going into sleep because a person in hypnosis is always aware of what you are saying. And in meditation, I should say in guided meditations at least, it's kind of the same thing. You are constantly aware because you're listening to the person doing the guided meditation, mm-hmm. and yet you are kind of in your own head. You are feeling out these deep states. And when we look at the brainwave patterns of those two, they really tend to match up. Some guided meditations only take you down to alpha, which is just below like our normal consciousness. Mm-hmm. But the really good ones tend to take you down to that theta state. And that's that state where you're feeling most creative. It's that state you pass through right before sleep.
So now the next thing we want to talk about is just the mental state and our emotional states also. So talk about how malleable you've been able to see people's emotional states be in working in the space.
Oh gosh, when I first started out in my mental health journey, I thought these emotions were bedrock, like you couldn't shake them. Mm-hmm. And I am just amazed at how quickly you can actually shape them. Yeah. And to give someone an idea of how quickly we can shape those things that kind of run our lives, there's an exercise I often run people through with, it comes from NLP, and that's kind of an offshoot of hypnosis. And it's all about changing the sense that we have 5 senses. And when you change the sense of one emotion to a different sense, it tends to depotentiate the negative energy. The most classic example is, say you have a headache. Next time, if you have a headache, just imagine that headache has a color and notice what color it is. And then imagine pulling that headache from your body and setting it in front of you and just looking at it. And when you change it from the kinesthetic sense, from the feeling sense, to the visual sense, you are literally rewiring how your brain experiences that. Because your brain, I should say our brains, experience everything holographically. Yeah. It's literally playing a movie or an experience in our mind every time we access that memory.
Absolutely.
And when you change the building blocks of that movie, say by making it brighter or darker or smaller or bigger, however you want to do it, when you change that movie, you change the actual experience. So we're literally rewriting our own reality.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great, and that's a great point. That people's real power in being able to build and dictate their own mental space in their lives really is a key component to really fixing their circumstances. I think when you keep yourself in a negative state of mind, negative outcomes, you are what you believe you can become. That's what people commonly say. So if you think well, or if you think positive things result, and positive outcomes result. You know what I'm saying? Because you're literally putting that energy. I'm big on energy. You're putting that energy into the world, and so therefore you're going to receive it. And it's the same thing with negative energy, with negative emotions. If you're putting negative vibes out there, you're going to attract negative vibes. Then in a real life example, it's like if you approach life angrily or with resentment, and then let's say you get a job opportunity or somebody approaches you, maybe they step on your foot by accident, and then all of a sudden you blow up on them, and the next thing you know, that ends up being someone who could have been your boss. Oh wait, job interview. Oh wait, you were that person who blew up on me. No, I'm not accepting you. As opposed to if you were to approach that the right way, the positive way, you don't let it become too big a deal. And then it's like, okay, I remember this person has a good heart, has good energy, has a good mental to them, Okay. So I think really just being able to control your mental fortitude, your mental space, is vital and helpful for many people.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree on that.
So for people who are brand new to the whole mental space and mental health and things of that nature, what are some practical tools they can use this in their everyday lives, especially if they're brand new to it, they're not ready to take on hypnosis? What are some other things you could recommend to them?
So I've gathered some of the most effective tools that I've found in my own practice, and I've compiled them into a video series. These are tools that I actually give to my anti-anxiety clients in case anxiety flares up in the middle of, between sessions, I should say. And they can find that on my website, but I can walk you through a couple of those tools. They take, 2 minutes at most.
Sure.
If you'd like.
Sure.
Yeah. The one that I start people with is very simple. You might have already heard from, a lot of people already heard about it because it comes from yoga and meditation. It's called 7-11 breathing. It goes by many names, by 4-7-8, by elongated breathing. But the whole concept is that you breathe out for longer than you breathe in. So you breathe in for a count of 11 and you breathe out for a count, or I should say you breathe in for a count of 7, breathe out for a count of 11.
Yes.
And it helps if you purse your lip, purse your lips so that you can, last all 11 minutes. But that works by sending a reverse signal up the vagus nerve. And so the vagus nerve is that nerve that runs from your brain down to your heart and controls parasympathetic control of your heart and your lungs. And when you breathe deeply, you are basically reversing that signal, that fight, flight, or freeze signal. And you're telling your brain that your body says it's okay to be calm, so you can be calm as well.
Yeah.
That's where I usually start people with because it's so accessible. One of my favorites, though, is one called bilateral stimulation. And this one comes from a psychologist and hypnotist out of New York City named Melissa Tiers. And to do this, all you need is an object that you can pass from hand to hand. It could be a wallet, an apple, a ball, a rock, or something. And first off, you always, with any of these techniques, you always rate where you are on a scale of 1 to 10 in that negative emotion. We call that the SUD scale, the subjective unit of distress. And so when you rate it, then you begin passing the object from hand to hand, just casually. The important thing is that you are crossing the midline center of your body, because as you do that, you are activating both halves of your brain. Your brain is literally talking to itself. And from studying schizophrenics and separating that corpus callosum, that piece that connects those two halves of the brain, we know that the brains are very active in communicating with each other. And when you have both sides communicating with each other as you pass that object back and forth, your brain naturally starts to slow down. Things are all right, and your negative emotions start to diminish. I'd say do that for 30 to 60 seconds and then check in again. I always recommend people take it to 0 though, because if you take it from like a 7 down to a 4, that's great, but you're also teaching your body that it's okay to have a level 4 anxiety and just kind of leave that in the background. And
when you say that out loud, it's like, wait a minute, level, like, no, you should really not try to, carry life with any anxiety. So just hearing that said out loud, it's like, dang, a level 4, like still, no. But continue. I didn't mean to interrupt.
I really like that technique because you can do that almost anywhere. I've done that walking in a hallway before a presentation. I've done that on the street. I've done that in a bathroom stall. I mean, like 7-Eleven breathing, it's so portable. And all of those techniques that I've done in that email or video series, they are so portable. And that's, if someone is curious and doesn't want to jump headfirst into hypnosis, that's where I would send them.
No, absolutely. And that's great tips. So before we close out, just, give your final piece of wisdom, your final message in a nutshell for the listeners.
I would say, no matter what you find to manage your own mental health, find something that works for you. Absolutely. Whether that's meditation or yoga or medication and therapy, whatever it is, because when we're struggling, we need that lifeline. And it really helps to build up that practice, whatever it is, before you need it. I mean, medication and therapy might not, it's kind of a bad example, but in the more esoteric kind of things like hypnosis and yoga and other things, build it up before you need it. Because as you exercise that mental muscle, you not only get stronger, but you might be able to head it off at the pass and either reduce how serious the mental health episode is or completely negate it.
No, absolutely. I 100% agree. The preventative side of mental health is very vital, and that'll help us stave off any possible future attacks or events that may happen. So great message. Absolutely. But that's a wrap. Episode 31 of For-In-Sight podcast. I would like to thank my guest, Doug Sands, for coming on and enlightening us and educating us. Thank you so much, Doug.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And tell the people where they can find you.
Yeah, they can find me. My website is anywherehypnosis.com, and they can find the 7-day stress-free challenge. That's what I call those 7 tools on that site. I also have some free hypnosis on my Instagram if people are curious about hypnosis but don't want to pay for it, I guess. I call it the Free Hypnosis Test Drive or Free Hypnosis Fridays, one of the two. And my handle is @makingyourmeaning.
All right. Very good. Well, guys, that'll do it for this collab edition of For-In-Sight. Thank you all for tuning in. Much love and appreciation.